every year for my birthday when I was a kid, my grandma would give me a birthday card full of these $2 bills. And the total dollar amount would equal my age for that year.
Huh.
And for those of you wondering, I don't know what she did on odd number years. She didn't give me a 1, so she either rounded up or rounded down. But anyways, my siblings and I would always get this for birthday gifts from her. And we eventually noticed over the years that each of them had the corner clipped off with scissors. So then we started wondering if we were part of some sort of weird experiment that she was doing, because if we spent them, she could identify them in the wild because, well, a $2 bill is pretty rare, but a clipped $2 bill, like that would have came from her. So then we felt like, well, I guess we should save them, but the corners are clipped, so there's no value beyond the $2. They were never going to be a collector's item. So we were all just kind of stuck with these piles of $2 bills that we felt like we could never spend. And I think part of the reason why we also didn't really spend the $2 bills much is because it just attracts a lot of weird, unwanted attention. Like, have you ever had a $2 bill?
Yeah, and I feel like I'm not alone in like somehow thinking that they were like super rare. Like I feel like they were always so valuable, but like I think you can still just go to a bank and get a $2 bill.
I guarantee you that's what she did.
Yeah, like and you give them $2, they give you a $2 bill.
Yes.
So I remember being like not wanting to spend them ever and having, because same thing, I think my grandpa would give them to me, but like I would never spend them. I just like keep them, you know?
Yeah, nothing like a crisp Jefferson. It's probably the first time someone has said that. But yeah, so like I didn't really want to spend them because, you know, laying down a bunch of $2 bills, someone's going to ask you like, what's the occasion or something. And I recently learned that Steve Wozniak is really into paying people with $2 bills. So Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple, who hasn't really had to work in about 40 years. I was reading up on what he's been doing lately. It's some mix of philanthropy and just like doing weird tech things that he wants.
Sure.
He basically has a blank check to do whatever he wants in life.
Yeah.
And over the years, he's been involved in just this activity of going to restaurants or going to buy random things, and he attempts to pay in all $2 bills. But he will try to pay in a sheet of uncut $2 bills. And what he gets like these weird looks, obviously. And then he tells the cashier, like, well, I've got these from my friend in my hometown. He's got this like really good printer, and he printed off these $2 bills for me, and they are so well made that the specifications mean that they count as legal tender. And sometimes this results in him getting the cops called on him. He's been questioned by the FBI several times for this now. And one time that like the cops were even reading the Miranda rights to him. Every single time this happens, the FBI or the police, they investigate the bills and they realize the money was real the whole time. So everything that Woz says is true. Because for some reason, you can pay the U.S. Mint to buy uncut sheets of money. And his friend with the printer in his hometown, he grew up in like San Jose, California, where one of the U.S. Mints is. So he just drives to the U.S. Mint and buys a bunch of twos and tries to just, look sketchy on purpose as this weird sort of prank. So I guess let this be a public service announcement to everyone out there. You can buy uncut sheets of money if you really want to. It's not a good deal. They charge you more than if you just bought the money.
I was wondering that.
Yeah, it's just enough to keep people away from it, like unless you really care about it. But if you do buy uncut sheets of money, maybe just keep them as a souvenir and definitely don't try to buy things with them.
Welcome to the Factoid Podcast. You did not ask for it, but we're going to tell you about it anyway. My name's Chris Umphreys.
And I'm Payton Gessel.
Payton, are you, and I think I probably know the answer to this, are you a phone call or a text message person?
I am more of a phone call person than I would like to admit.
I feel like I know that about you just because, like, if you have a thing that's longer than a very short thing, you'll be like, hey, can I call you? Is that fine? And then we'll talk on the phone, which is fine. Because I know a lot of people like that. And I think I'm probably on that. I think it depends on the situation. It depends on the people. It depends on a lot of things. But it is just easier to be like, I'm just going to call and talk about this thing real quick.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to get a lot of information exactly how you want to say it into a text message.
Right. And then you don't like if you text somebody, then you have to worry about if they're going to misinterpret your tone, think you're angrier than you are. But then you can just see how angry I truly am.
That's right.
If I call them.
Truly, it's very hard to interpret what someone is, like the undertones of everything in a text message. Almost impossible. But I think us being phone call people maybe makes this topic more interesting to me than other people. And I hope that's not true. I hope everyone's interested in it. But today we're going to be talking about the phone system. And so we're going to start from the very beginning, okay? Alexander Graham Bell, we all know this name, credited as the inventor of the telephone. At least that's what I was told. That's what you were told. Did you know that that's a contested fact of history?
Oh, man.
It turns out, I didn't even know this. I wasn't planning on really talking about Alexander Graham Bell very much. I was just going to intro it with this. But it turns out there's like a whole backstory here. And there's another guy in the mix that is, some people think he actually invented the telephone first.
It's crazy.
I know. It's crazy. History is always crazy. That's what makes National Treasure such a good movie. But in the 1870s, Alexander Graham Bell was in a race with a man named Elisha Gray for who would invent the telephone first. They had both been working on different alternatives for the same goal, which was basically to transmit like a message through a wire over a distance, right? And often, and even they were going to do like both ways. Like, can I put it this way and put it this way? Can it happen at the same time? And so that was kind of their work. That was kind of their experiments. They were both trying to do this. They were both people in that field, right? In like whether that be science or invention or whatever you want to call it. They were both trying to do that. And even though this is 1870s technology, I want you to know it's still kind of over my head. So what I'm saying might not really be that technical. So I'm hoping no one gets really too serious, right? But it had something to do with, they would basically like submerge a copper wire like in some kind of liquid, and there was mercury, and it had to do with like certain reactions. And the goal originally was to just get like a telegraph across, or like, you know, like Morse code or something. And that was the goal before vocal, right? But vocal is obviously the end goal here. And in 1874, Elisha Gray introduced his invention to the public, which is like he had a working way to transmit just basically like musical tones over a distance through a wire, right? And so he presented his invention to these people. He showed them in a demonstration, and it's interesting. He showed them at Highland Park Presbyterian Church in Highland Park, Illinois, which is kind of cool.
Nice.
Kind of random. I guess you do that kind of thing at a church. Maybe that's just an easy place to meet. I don't really know. All I know is that's where he did it, and it kind of worked. But he basically gave up on that because for years and more past, he couldn't really figure out how to get it to do anything better than that. So he didn't completely give up because about 14 months later, he decided to file what's called a patent caveat with the U.S. Patent Office, which is basically, it turns out, it's just like a mini patent that gives you the ability to like write it, like they give you time to put in the real patent. Right?
Yeah.
So he wrote up a diagram, put it together, and sent in this patent caveat, and that gives you more time to like submit the real one. Well, on the same day that he turned in his patent caveat, Alexander Graham Bell's lawyer hand-delivered to the patent office a patent application for the original telephone the same exact day, but it was denied because it wasn't there before the patent caveat turned in by Elisha Gray.
Okay.
And Alexander Graham Bell's was a little bit more sophisticated. It wasn't the exact same thing, but the goal was close enough. It was apparently able to transmit like vocal tones, so you could actually get like a voice from one place to another. Also, keep in mind that in this time period, in the 1800s, you weren't actually required to have a working prototype to submit a patent. You could kind of just submit a patent and then hope you could figure it out. Maybe that's still how it is. I don't know. I don't think it is, though. I'm pretty sure you have to have a little bit of something. But yeah, you didn't actually have to, so neither of them necessarily had to, but the first one there, Elisha Gray. A few weeks later, still in the same month, Bell went to D.C. He's from, like, Boston or something, and he went to D.C. to the patent office, and reportedly, according to what we know, he went there. He didn't have anything really extra written in his notes about this project, right? The telephone thing. He didn't have anything more than he had already turned in his notebook. But upon returning home, the day after he came home, there's some, from what we've learned, apparently there's like people date their notes and stuff. He has a note the day he returned home that has lots of information in it about a telephone system and new information, stuff he didn't necessarily have written down before. It had like extra diagrams, extra pictures, and things that he had thought up apparently, and it was very, very similar to the patent caveat that had been turned in by Elisha Gray. And just a few weeks before that, after coincidentally he had gone to D.C. Now, I'm not saying that he stole it. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, this is somewhat a conspiracy theory, I think. I don't know. I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist here, but what I'm saying is it's very possible that he had more knowledge than people might assume about the experiments and things that Gray was doing, and maybe Gray on him as well. I don't really know.
Yeah, I guess you can't really say that he had like a bug or he had some sort of
Exactly.
way to listen because they hadn't invented
no
very
telephones.
Good
We're talking about the late 1870s here, right? So where they didn't technology, nothing, right? Like you said, no phones even.
No wires to tap.
That's right. No way to tap that. Yeah. Nothing. Crazy, right? So they couldn't just be spying on each other like normal. But word does get around. In fact, they say that like the community, the scientific community was quite small. And so people did kind of know about everyone and kind of sort of word would get around about like what was getting done and who was doing it and how they were doing it,
Sure.
right? Which makes sense because I think word of mouth, even over a distance, travels pretty quickly. Some people say that Gray is actually the one to steal Bell's work and turned it in before Bell could get there. Some say that Bell is the one to steal Gray's work and was trying to get it because he happened to be a little more powerful, know a little more people. I don't know. I'm not saying that any of that is true. I'm not saying one way or another. But right after this, a little bit of a legal battle began to form to find out who actually did invent the telephone. And as most legal things do, this sort of went on forever. And so in the very late 70s, so I think in 1879, this was all kind of happening in the mid 1870s. So in the late 1870s, Alexander Graham Bell admitted under oath to having a quote unquote very general conversation with the patent examiner of the time, his last name being Wilbur. But nothing more, just very general. So if that's true, I don't think that's bad. I think it's probably fine, but nothing more, right? But this is where it kind of gets juicy, okay? Like 6 or 7 years after this, in an affidavit from Wilbur, right, the patent examiner, he says that at that time, he actually somehow, I don't really know the circumstances, no one does, he owed Alexander Graham Bell's lawyer a lot of money. And Alexander Graham Bell came up to him and said, "Hey, buddy, if I give you $100, can you show me the thing? Can you just show me what he turned in? And maybe could you even put my thing at the top of the stack?" And so he admitted to maybe being a part of something, right?
Wow.
But here's the thing. It's worth noting that in the future, as they have more interviews and he says more things, he says a lot more and kind of changes his story, and it makes Graham Bell look a lot less guilty of the things that he was maybe accusing him of. So I don't know what's true. No one knows what's true. But obviously, at this point, we all know that Alexander Graham Bell is in the history books as the creator of the telephone. So for whatever reason, whatever all this turned out to be, all the information that's out there, it's obviously pretty clear that probably Alexander Graham Bell was the guy. And what I think I know to be true now is that I'm pretty sure both of them, both Gray and Bell, knew a lot about what each other were doing, and they were both trying to do the same thing. They might have even been working together. They might have talked about it. And so whoever came up with it first, I don't know. What I do know is Graham Bell came up with working prototypes not that long after this, just months after, working things of how to get vocal noises from one place to another. So what he created was the telephone. He did it well, and what he created is a very important invention. What I do know for sure about the telephone system as a whole is that it's very interesting. From its very birth, it's interesting. We use phones every single day. We talked about it already. You call, I call, we text, whatever, right? People use phones every day. In the professional world, you cannot get around without making a phone call. People have to make phone calls every single day, many, many times a day. And the technology has, however, transformed, and it has turned into something. Maybe the way it works is a little different. The infrastructure has changed, but it began and it continues to be a relatively basic, fundamental technology. It does not really stray very far from the roots of what it was and how it works. Why did I decide to talk to you about the phone system, you might ask? Well, that's a good question. Thank you for asking. I read a book by this guy named Kevin Mitnick, and I read it because it's about, like, he's a well-known, like, hacker. But it turns out his hacking was in the late 80s, early 90s, and he like hacked telephone systems.
Was he a phreaker?
He's a phone phreaker.
Yeah, so Steve Wozniak.
Yes.
He was a phreaker.
Lots of stuff about Steve Wozniak in this book. And so he's what you would call a phone phreaker, spelled Phreak, right? And so it kind of fascinated me with the entire system, with the entire technology. And even though it's completely obsolete, I wanted to know more about it. And so what I want you to know is that from this point on, all the information we're talking about, the telephone, how it was created, what the system was, almost all completely obsolete. None of it means anything anymore. We don't even use this anymore. But it's really kind of fascinating how it began. At its most basic function, besides like the hardware created by Alexander Graham Bell, like the what it does, right? Getting a voice to hear there. The phone is just a way to transmit information from point A to point B, right? And at its most basic level, it's like in my home, I have a wire that runs into my house, and that wire is connected to another house, right? So at its most basic, it's like basically the two cups on a string.
Yep.
And I can talk into one, and the other person can hear it, and then talk into it, and I can hear it. So that's basically what a telephone is. And at its basic implementation on like a village or a city level would be, I have a line in my home that runs to like a central hub, and everyone who chooses to be a part of the telephone system has a line that runs to that central hub, right? It's called a switchboard. And there would have been what would be called a switchboard operator, also known as, and this is interesting, the hello girls. That's what they called them, right? Apparently it was a relatively female-dominated job. And what that means is you would pick up the phone, they would be notified that someone picked up the phone, and they'd say, hello, who would you like to talk to? And then I would say, well, I want to talk to Johnny down on 4th Street, number 334. And she, the hello girl, the operator, would physically take your cord, plug it in to Johnny's cord, or whatever name I said. Like they would physically move it to that place, and then you'd be connected. So it's literally as rudimentary as the two cups on a string, except someone would put it on whatever string it was supposed to go on, right? So that's the most basic function of it. But it did begin to grow, even though for years and years, that's what it was. If you've ever seen like Andy Griffith's show, like they have basically a box on the wall with like an earpiece you hold, and it has a microphone. Right. There's no dialer or anything. And he would pick it up and he'd be like, hey, Andy Griffith, I think her name was like Sarah or something. He'd be like, hey, Sarah, can you get me to the mayor or whatever, right? And that's how it was. That's like literally for years and years and years how it worked. It worked that way from the very, very early 1900s up all the way into like early 1940s is when it became common that maybe in bigger areas, bigger phone systems, bigger companies, they would have some automation. And automation's interesting. It's still a very rudimentary thing, but it turns out the technology was growing. And so this is where the dial tone comes into play. And we all know what a dial tone is, at least I can assume. When you pick up a landline telephone, and I think most of you listening to this are going to have this experience, what is crazy is that there's like whole generations of people like younger than us that literally have never done that. Yeah. But basically you pick up a landline phone, and it makes this noise, right? You turn it on and it goes, like it buzzes, right? That's not the exact noise, but it's like a specific noise. That is called the dial tone. And the dial tone, as the person making the call, means it's ready for you to dial a number. We are ready, let's go. But how this worked is this is all part of the automated system, right? And so phones went from being just a microphone hanging on a wall with an operator to being like this device with a number pad, and then it would also have a tone generator. And that tone generator would be like the dial tone. So it would be generating that tone. And then the switchboard would have this thing that says someone picked up a phone, and it would start listening for a dial tone. And so when it heard the dial tone, it would say, okay, now I'm listening for them to click their numbers. And the numbers would then generate tones, right? So you know how like every number on a phone goes, they all had separate tones. And so there was basically a machine that was decoding the tones you were making to hear the numbers you were pushing. I had no idea. And it could only work that way if you had a dial tone to start with, because that means, hey, they're ready, I'm listening. So basically like it was an automated thing. It would hear it, it would flick a switch, it would start listening for the numbers. When it heard every number, it would then move automated, like connect your line going in to the line going out that you needed to go to, right? And so that's how it works. It's the same exact concept. It just didn't require a person. And there'd still be a switchboard operator. There'd still be somebody working in the company, but it wouldn't be someone that they didn't have to monitor every single thing, right? Goodbye, girls. That's right. Goodbye, girls. That's funny. But then, say, enter long distance, right? This is another thing. I moved to Colorado in 2016, and there was a lady in my church who got so upset with me because she said, I can't call you because your phone number is long distance. And I said, what? Because I know, like, I don't even know if in my lifetime that was really much of a concern or not, because I think most of my memorable life, we've had a cell phone probably. Like, I got a cell phone when I was in 7th grade or something. And so I just thought, what do you mean? And she said, your area code is out of here, and so it charges me more money to call you. And she was talking about, like, to use my landline, I have to pay more money to talk to you. Very interesting how that works. But basically, long distance is a thing because, yeah, a whole city can be connected to one switchboard, but what if you want to call another city? Well, then the switchboards, basically, they would all get connected to the other cities, and they would have to send you out that one line and go to that other city or however it's set up, right? But basically, it ended up costing the company more to do that. So they had to send that cost down to the user, right? So if I need to call long distance, it ended up being like 30 or 40 cents a minute to be on the phone long distance, right? Which is, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
For anyone, right? It's expensive. But it had to be because it wasn't that easy to do. Well, if you were going to call long distance, there was a different dial tone, right? And so it would make a different sound, which would notify that switchboard, hey, I'm looking for a long distance call. Then you would dial that number and it would send it there. This is where it gets fascinating, right? Because I've learned all about this phone phreaking stuff. And it turns out you can recreate a dial tone, or at least at the beginning, when they first started dial tones, they were not very complex tones. And so it was very simple. So you know what that means? It means that immediately people who realize this would be doing things that you're not supposed to do. Enter Joe Ingressia, a.k.a. Joy Bubbles, okay? This is his name. I'm not sure why, but that's his name. That's what they called him. But he was the first ever person to be dubbed phone phreak, which we're talking about, right? And a phone phreak, basically, for those of you who don't know, it's basically just someone who learns about, uses, exploits, takes advantage of the public phone system and, like, gets to places you're not supposed to, uses it in ways you're not supposed to, accesses information that normal people should not have access to. And Joe had absolute pitch, basically perfect pitch, meaning he could, if he heard a noise or if he heard a song, he could replicate that noise. So Joe, after hearing the dial tone one time back when dial tones were simple, he could just make the noise.
That's crazy.
And so what happens is, if a dial tone goes on during a phone call, it would disconnect your phone call because they think you're ready to dial, right?
Yeah.
So it's said that Joe would walk around town and hum or whistle very loudly by payphones and just hang people's phone calls up. Because he could perfectly replicate the dial tone.
Wow.
And it's different because, like, it's different now because, well, it's different now for many reasons, but a dial tone eventually turned into two tones, like two frequencies at one time. So it was a lot harder you couldn't just hum it. You had to generate it some other way, right?
You need two people humming different frequencies.
Exactly. But he was the very first person to kind of figure this out. And he did it a bunch of different ways. He did a bunch of different things. There's one instance that's more famous in pop culture that has kind of made its way through history a little bit better than Joe Ingressia, and that is John Draper, also known as Captain Crunch. Have you ever heard of John Draper?
I've heard of Captain Crunch, yeah.
So John Draper, it's actually in my favorite book ever, Ready Player One, they talk about this guy, but John Draper is the guy who realized that the whistle that came in the Captain Crunch package, how they used to give you toys at the bottom of cereal, the whistle that came in the Captain Crunch cereal at the bottom emitted a perfect 2600 hertz tone that was exactly what it took to notify a receiver that you were basically an internal line, right? This is a tone that nobody really should have had access to. It's basically the equivalent of, like, getting root access to, like, a system now, basically.
Man.
So if you could emit this tone at the right time, you would get access to the phone system that would basically allow you to dial out to whatever you wanted, because when you're an admin, you can do whatever you want.
Right.
And so he learned that this whistle that comes in every box of Captain Crunch for every kid emits this tone that gives everybody free phone calls. And so, like, basically, all you had to do is blow that whistle at the right time and then, boom, make whatever phone call you want. It's kind of crazy. It's crazy to me that, like, literally it was made up of something so simple. Just noises. Like, people could literally, like, in the phone phreaking community, like, they all had these tones. They were so frequently referenced, and they knew about them so much that they would literally just like, they would be like, or they would call a number and they would get stuck in a place and it would be like emitting a tone. They'd be like, oh, I've never heard this one. I wonder what that means. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Like a different language, but also a very simple language.
Very simple, very rudimentary, very auxiliary, yet somehow automated and like technology, you know? They still use dial tones today. So like if you pick up a phone like at your house, even though almost all telephone communication, like almost everything, so it's called VoIP, Voice over Internet Protocol, but they still use dial tones. And the literal only reason they use it is because historically people want to hear a dial tone when they pick up the phone. There's no reason they do it anymore other than to make us feel comfortable.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
I had no idea.
Yeah, so like it's just a tone that it doesn't matter anymore. It completely, like on your cell phone, it doesn't do that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I assumed it was some sort of like backwards compatibility thing where like they need to leave this in just in case.
Right.
But no.
Nope, it's literally just because it makes us feel more comfortable to hear that when we pick up the phone. Like humans, that is. I think,
Right.
But what I also think is interesting is in a couple generations, it's not going to be necessary anymore because people don't even, if VoIP business phones are even still a thing, like people aren't going to care because they've never heard a dial tone anyway. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very interesting. And while the system of phones has definitely grown and transformed and changed through the years, the phreaking community has as well. The phone phreaks are still around. Instead of generating tones to trick like rather unsophisticated computers into thinking that you live somewhere else or are a different person, it's kind of changed into like more of a general, what you understand as like hacking stuff, right? Like getting into servers and doing things you're not supposed to, and much more illegal things than you really used to have to do in order to do this. Obviously, you're stealing phone minutes you're not supposed to back in the day, but it seemed a lot more innocent than it does to like hack into a server of a phone company and steal people's information.
Absolutely.
So it's still a thing. People still do it. SIM swapping, if you've ever heard of that, it's like a thing basically where you can like take someone's SIM card and basically put someone else's SIM card in your phone and then it turns into their phone. But like you can do it digitally, and people do that all the time. It's a big thing. It's still a thing. Phone phreaking. It's just not the same as it was. It's still interesting, and there's still a lot of that I could get into, but that's a story for a different time. So next time, if you make a phone call, don't forget where it all started. Things will always change, and I think it's for the better. But with that being said, I am sad that you can't have near as much fun with a box of Captain Crunch and a plastic whistle as you used to.
It's the end of summer, and as I look back on it, I ate a lot of hot dogs. Not in any sort of competition, but probably just a few more than I should have.
Sure.
And speaking of competitions, did you watch the Kobayashi versus Chestnut?
I did not watch it, no. I know we talked about it. I should have, but I did not watch it.
Yes, I did watch it. Spoilers, Chestnut does win.
Sure.
He sets every record possible. I think he got 83 hot dogs in 10 minutes.
That's... it blows my mind.
That he had to change his technique because I guess dunking them in water was illegal for this competition. But it is just comical watching them.
Turns out maybe that held him back anyway.
Maybe, yeah. Exactly. He credited Kobayashi being there as the reason, but who knows? Yes. I guess I wanted to ask you, what do you like on a hot dog normally?
To be honest with you, I'm very basic when it comes to hot dogs. I know a lot of people like onions, relish, whatever, right? And I mean, I don't know if a chili dog counts as a hot dog. I like a chili dog.
Yes.
I like a chili cheese dog. But honestly, if I'm just like grilling a hot dog, I just put mustard on it. That's
Okay.
it. Just straight mustard. I like normal yellow mustard, and I think it's gives some nice, I don't know what to call it, just like a nice bite to it,
Sure.
So, just straight mustard. Nothing else.
Yeah, I like a chili dog as well. And one of my recent favorites is one of the ones that we had for dinner tonight at Dirty Frank's,
Okay.
a hot dog place in town. And it has cream cheese, jalapenos, and bacon bits on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually started making this at home. Usually not with the bacon bits. I substitute like an everything bagel seasoning on there. And I know it sounds kind of weird, but it's kind of been my favorite hot dog as of late. And it's probably contributed to the amount that I've eaten. And, not only did I get to eat a lot of hot dogs this summer, but I also gave away even more. So my church did a tailgate for the local high school football team right across the street. And my responsibility at the tailgate was to serve about 150 or so hot dogs. And we had plenty extra. We didn't know how many people were going to come. And just as I'm serving all of these hot dogs to people, it got me thinking about how the hot dog is the great equalizer. Everyone in society can get down with a hot dog, it seems like.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise when I discovered that hot dogs have been a tool for politicians for the past century. The hot dog's first big entrance into politics was in 1939 with President FDR and the UK's King George VI. So this is right around when World War II is breaking out in Europe, and King George VI is coming over to talk to FDR, and instead of having some big extravagant meal at the White House, they go out for a picnic in the countryside. And so the whole family comes out, and they have this hot dog picnic lunch. And King George grabs his first hot dog, and he looks at it, and he turns to FDR and says, "What should I do?" and Roosevelt says, "Put it in your mouth and keep on chewing until you finish it." And the media has a field day with this. They love they love all the humor of the moment. They love this foreign new food. And it actually catches on in England, where like British socialites are like walking around asking to try to eat hot dogs because they want to be like their king, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
I think politicians like this so much just because that when you prove that you're willing to eat a hot dog, you're no longer some out-of-touch rich person. You're not some extravagant king. You're just like the average Joe down the street, and you're someone I can relate to.
That's right.
So in more recent times, Mitt Romney loves to make sure that everybody knows that he loves hot dogs, and specifically that hot dog is his favorite meat, which is quite the bold claim.
Yeah.
Every year, or at least a few years, on National Hot Dog Day, which is apparently the third Wednesday in July, he will make a video celebrating National Hot Dog Day and remind everybody that it's his favorite meat. But today, I want to talk to you about a form of hot dog that is shaping the political landscape, not in America, but in Australia. The democracy sausage. So in Australia, it is illegal to not vote in elections.
Oh, wow.
They have this thing called compulsory voting and compulsory elections. And you basically have to try really hard not to vote. I think if you don't vote in an election, you get fined a certain amount of money. There are some exceptions. If you file for some sort of exception, like you can kind of get out of it. But because it's so hard to not vote, you have extremely high turnout. And the goal is that people will be a little bit more engaged in their government because at the very least, they have to walk into the polls and vote. And because of that over the years, because election day is on a Saturday, most businesses have off on that Saturday and everyone's got to go do this, that a lot of fundraisers and nonprofits will set up in and around the polling areas. So you go in, you cast your vote, and then there's someone trying to collect, money for some sort of charity, and they sell a bunch of hot dogs right outside for their charity fundraiser. And right around the 1980s or so is when like portable electric and gas grills started to become popular, and it made it very easy to just grill the hot dogs and the sausages right outside of those places. You didn't have to bring you didn't have to bring your big Barbie, I assume, as they would say. So they started up grilling up. I'll use the term hot dog and sausage kind of interchangeably because as we kind of dive into what they're eating, it's a little hard to tell. One of the terms they like to use as a slang term, though, is they call it a snag.
A snag?
It kind of sounds cool. I don't know. Like, would I prefer snag over glizzy?
Glizzy's the word that people use around here these days.
Yeah.
And snag seems like it could mean something else, too. I don't know what.
Yes, for sure.
But I like it, though.
Yes. So my understanding is that the meat is somewhere maybe a little bit better than an American hot dog, maybe like a bad sausage in other places. And for the bun, I feel like the bun is the most interesting part because they don't normally have regular hot dog buns. That's actually an upcharge if you want a normal hot dog bun. A traditional democracy sausage is served on a white piece of bread turned diagonally so that it's like at its longest, which seems weird, but there are a lot of purists that I've heard that say like it does not count if it's not on a piece of bread. So then there's some other typical toppings that you might get on the sausage. Nothing too crazy, like a barbecue sauce or a ketchup. You can get onions as well. They're usually an additional cost. Nothing too crazy when it comes to the toppings, though.
Did you know that in Chicago, which is like a big hot dog place, they do not want you to have ketchup on your hot dog. Did you know that?
Yeah, when I lived out near that area, I knew that it was, yeah, that there were a lot of rules to how you should or shouldn't do it. I do not like a Chicago-style dog. I've been to Portillo's. I get chili dogs. They haven't judged me yet, but yes,
Yeah.
I know that.
Well, I think it's only like super purist places like that have, like that. Those are the kind of places they won't have ketchup for you. Like it won't be an option,
Right.
Which again, I only put mustard, so it's not a big deal to me. But I also don't like onions on my dog either, which is kind of a, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So since the 1980s or so, whenever this started catching on, it didn't have this name for a while. The term democracy sausages maybe in the last decade or so. But in the more recent years, this has developed kind of into what an Australian would say is one of their cultural icons. So when we think of what is a stereotypical Australian thing, we think of a kangaroo, Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, and the phrase shrimp on the Barbie. But like, if you ask an Australian, like, what's a super Australian thing? They're going to say the democracy sausage. Think about how on election day in America, everyone has to take their selfie that has the I voted sticker, and you post your selfie that says I voted, just to like prove that you did the thing. Over there, they have some fun with it, and they just take pictures of themselves eating the hot dogs. And that essentially works as saying I voted, which I guess they all have to vote.
Yeah.
But it's because it's kind of like a fun, like irreverent thing. Maybe it's like just a picture of the dog. Maybe it's you eating it. That it's caught on with a lot of younger voters, and people are hoping that as this continues, that this is going to continue to just drum up more positive associations with being involved in your democracy and voting and being part of that process, to where it's going to help them out in the future as a country. And one of the other positive things is that since everyone pretty much has the day off for election day, you go, you cast your vote, you get your food, and then now you're just in the middle of town. So everyone just kind of hangs out and has fun together. Like think about if we had election day on the 4th of July and it was a weekend.
Sure.
Like think about the atmosphere and the I don't know how you feel on like election day, but normally it's a Tuesday. I have to rearrange my schedule. Yeah. Amy and I need to get in the car at the same time. How are we going to do all this stuff? But to think about like the stress-free of, I've got the whole day. We're here to hang out. Let's go get some.
The 4th of July, I think everyone has these outdoor parties and you grill out. Yeah, yeah.
Are you coming to my place afterwards, or are we going out somewhere else?
That's right.
Yeah. So the big test for Australian politicians, though, is that you'd think it would be pretty easy to just eat the hot dog normal and have no problems and just get it over with, but they don't. So in 2016, Bill Shorten was running for the Prime Minister of Australia, and he attends one of these sausage sizzles outside of one of the polling places, and he buys a sausage and he tries to eat it sideways. Like, think about the normal way you would eat a hot dog, rotate it 90 degrees, and that's how he tried to fit it and take a bite out of it. And there were so many photos and videos of him trying to do this, and I'll say he lost the race, and I can't say it was because of that, but it's been like 8 years and he still can't live this moment down.
What was it? Is that how he normally eats a hot dog?
I'm not sure. I think since then he's tried to help change the narrative and try to come up with reasons as to why, but it comes off as like, this is my first time eating a hot dog. I'm King George VI and I don't know how to do it. I'm above the hot dog.
Yeah, that's odd. It's an odd thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then about a year later, Malcolm Turnbull, the guy who beat him in that prime minister election, he's at some sort of disaster relief event, and there's some just little old lady trying to sell some democracy sausages. And she asks him, hey, Mr. Prime Minister, would you like to buy one from me? And he makes some sort of excuse about like, he can't eat one with the outfit that he's currently wearing. And that was a huge PR nightmare for him. Like, wow. You probably have 7 suits, man. You could just like, even if you get like the hot dog, if it gets on your
also
suit,
just lean forward. It'll fall on the ground,
Absolutely. So the sausages, they have been so important to Australians that even vegetarian politicians will eat the hot dogs just to avoid scrutiny.
Wow.
So there is this like a lady who's part of the Greens Party, as they call it, and they're starting to kind of gain ground in the country. And I'd say like they're less of a joke than the Green Party is in America. So the former leader of the Greens Party, I was watching this interview with her, and she says like, I'm a vegetarian for, like environmental and moral reasons, but when it comes to election day, I just can't resist and I become a carnivore. And I thought that was quite the beautiful metaphor, just for like what the democracy sausage can do to Australia. We all have our different viewpoints, but like we can celebrate our differences by sharing in this united activity of eating cheap hot dogs. Thank you for listening to the Factoid Podcast. If you have a factoid that you want to share with us, send us an email at what'syours@factoidpodcast.com.
As always, find us everywhere you find all your podcasts or on our website, factoidpodcast.com.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.